Thank you. Can everybody hear me back there? Okay, welcome. For those of you Redskins fans, thank you for giving up the to your DVR the first hour of the game or so. But anyway, it's really great. Thank you, Jason, for the invitation. First of all, it's great to be back in Vint Hill. I have to, first of all, before I go any further, I've got my title slide here. Let me get through the stuff that makes the lawyers smile. This is my disclaimer. Truth in advertising, I am still a part-time employee of the Department of Defense, specifically with Defense Acquisition University in Fort Belvoir, although I work primarily with a fellowship out at Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, and from my home in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I also have a small LLC I formed there, Kepler Strategies. If ESET does like Johannes Kepler space stuff, so I got to keep that element in there. And most of what I do right now is contracted research for the Army in areas related to space, cyberspace, and nuclear operations, which, boy howdy, in the last 5 years, those have come much more to the forefront than they were previously. I say it's good to be back at Vint Hill Farms because I went through first grade through 12th grade in Nokesville, Virginia. So where there used to be Nokesville Elementary School, and then Brentsville District, middle senior high school there. My parents' home was before they passed away and we sold it, was right in Greenwich, so about 2 miles from here. And when I was in college, going through ROTC down in Charlottesville, Air Force ROTC program there, I took over my brother's job here at Vint Hill when he was still in high school to make some money over Christmas during the Christmas break. And I scrubbed dishes over in the chow hall here. So also learned to swim at the pool with the Red Cross. So anyway, this brings back a lot of memories. And you could have blindfolded me today and put me in this parking lot. I couldn't have told you where in the world I was. It's changed so much. So hopefully I'm going to talk a lot about the last 60 years with Cheyenne Mountain. It's been around for that long. And I want to give you an impression of the history, what it's like to actually go in the mountain if you were like going on a cruise ship. Talk a little bit about when I was working there, and it was Cheyenne Mountain Operations Center, and it was back in U.S. Space Command when that existed, in NORAD, what operations were like at that point, and then kind of bring you up to speed about what's happened to the mountain, what it is being used for today. So I'm going to start off with a news clip. It's about a 5-minute clip, and the reason I'm going to show it to you is it'll give a little bit of the context of why the mountain was designed, how it was built, and it will show you some video of the inside. This video was made just this year, and it was May of this year was the 60th anniversary of the North America Aerospace Defense Organization, or NORAD, the command there. And so, well, I'll just video speak for itself, and then we'll get into to talking more about it. So let's see if I... Oh, by the way, you're going to get a commercial from Navy Federal Credit Union. Couldn't help it. They pay for the website, so hey, it's only fair.
At an early age, Navy Federal was really helping me to smart with my money. Sometimes what people say it's like family.
I just feel like there's something so
I hear that?
powerful about being a part of that financial community.
Recent headlines make it all too clear that the end of the Cold War did not mean the end of nuclear threats to this nation. North Korea has threatened to launch a nuclear strike. Iran says it will resume its nuclear program and is feverishly working on a ballistic missile capable of lifting a warhead. As these threats multiply, the U.S. is keeping watch from deep inside a fortress buried inside a mountain in Colorado. Here's a look at the unseen outpost where our nation keeps its eyes on the world's bad actors. The year was 1967. American involvement in Vietnam was growing and already controversial. The Monkees topped the charts, #1 for 6 consecutive weeks, with one of the biggest hits of the year.
Spencer Tracy as you've never seen him before.
The nation mourned the death of a major star from Hollywood's golden age, Spencer Tracy. And a mysterious military installation, the Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado Springs, opened its 25-ton doors. It took years and 1.5 million pounds of dynamite to blast through thousands of feet of solid granite and build this complex. Today, Cheyenne Mountain is still the most fortified military installation in North America. Conceived and constructed during the Cold War, when a Soviet nuclear attack was a chillingly real possibility. As Americans learned to prepare for the worst-case scenario of all-out nuclear war,
First, you dump. Then, you cover.
the Army Corps of Engineers was busy hollowing out a cavern deep in Cheyenne Mountain. Erecting inside a complex of 15 buildings, each rests on massive springs, shock absorbers, so the buildings, the people, and equipment can ride out any type of seismic event, including shock waves from a nuclear detonation. This was born out of the fears of the Cold War and nuclear attack, right?
It was. Early design concepts were developed in the late 50s, with construction starting in 61.
And the idea is that you have a fortress in here, impenetrable from the outside, no electromagnetic pulse, even nuclear attack.
Correct. It was designed to survive and endure all those types of threats.
The hundreds of people who work here commute through a long tunnel before arriving at the twin blast doors.
Those are some serious doors. They are. We have twin 25-ton blast doors to protect the inner workings of the complex.
The doors would open and close in sequence to let staffers in and out. But at least one of the two doors remained closed around the clock from 1967 until 1994, well after the Cold War was over and the Soviet Union disbanded. These days, both are left open unless there is a drill or a threat to the nation.
When was the last time these doors were closed due to an emergency? Last time would actually be on September 11th. There was a non-responsive aircraft that had departed San Diego. It was over Colorado at the time that the U.S. grounded all air traffic. And because they couldn't reach the pilot, we actually closed the doors just as a precautionary measure.
The primary mission of the Cheyenne Mountain installation? To monitor missile launches. Any launch anywhere in the world is instantly seen.
We actually get data sent to us from sensor sites all over the world and also in space. And then we process that data and send it to NORAD, US NORTHCOM, so the decision makers can make decisions about any launches that have taken place.
These Air Force personnel are on the front lines of high tech, keeping tabs on the threats facing this country.
It's got to be a pretty big burden, huh?
I wouldn't use the word burden. I feel honored to be able to sit in the mountain and protect everybody, friends, family, and again, allies, country, everything. It feels good to actually do something that's, I feel like, is a part of the fight.
Given recent bellicose language from North Korea, Syria, Russia, and Iran, it's clear the worries of the Cold War era remain alive today, as does the need for vigilance inside this granite fortress.
You guys drill all the time, but we could wake up any day and you're watching the screens and all of a sudden it's the real deal. Somebody's launching an ICBM. Correct. And if that were to occur, we are ready. You know, if that is the worst day in American history, the airmen that are on duty are ready at a second's notice to react and do what's necessary to protect America. So a couple of things. There are hundreds of people.
Okay, so that should give you a little background about what it looks like today in Cheyenne Mountain. I'll back you up in a little bit in history, and then we'll also come back at the end and talk about what those operations that you saw going on there are. So timeline-wise, let me give you a few just milestones in there. A couple were mentioned in the video. Yes, the NORAD was established in 1958, so it just again celebrated in May this year the 60th anniversary. Cheyenne Mountain was started in May of 1961, the excavation, and completed in 67. From the get-go, it was to do both the air defense mission and also space surveillance. And in fact, the Air Force command it was assigned to was originally called Air Defense Command, and NORAD had North American Air defense, on there, and it got changed to aerospace because of the work with the space surveillance and other aspects of that. The missile defense aspects of it didn't come in, as you can see, until 1974, where they were actually incorporated into the operations of the mountain. Peterson Air Force Base was actually designated as the backup facility to Cheyenne Mountain, largely in the command post roles and the space roles. That's now been reversed, where the main operations center is actually on Peterson Air Force Base in the U.S. Northern Command headquarters building there, which didn't exist 15 years ago. And Cheyenne Mountain is now the backup for many of those facilities. For the period that I worked there, the formative items I'll point to there, in 82, the Air Force established an Air Force Space Command. 3 years later, a joint command, which means command made up of all the services. A functional unified command was established, United States Space Command. And when I was in Cheyenne Mountain, we got to the point where CMOC was established, which first they had consolidated operations of U.S. Space Command and NORAD, the command functions of that in there, and then they combined them into the CMOC. So our patches actually changed and some of the procedure changed. In a later clip, I'll show you when we wore our flight suits, we actually had a NORAD and the U.S. Space Command patch. There was very rare. Usually see one command patch here. We actually had them both because depending on what part of the mission we were performing on a given crew shift, some of them were for NORAD, some of it was for U.S. Space Command. And of course, U.S. Space Command was stood down after 9/11, and some of the unified command plan for the United States was changed. U.S. Northern Command was stood up, and United States Strategic Command was stood up in Omaha. All the space functions that were in Cheyenne Mountain went under United States Strategic Command, and a lot of the NORAD functions went under U.S. North Command. But one thing that has not changed is the main reason why Cheyenne Mountain is there. And it comes down to that ITWAA, the Integrated Tactical Warning and Attack Assessment. That's pretty much for the 60 years has been the primary focus of all the missions going on there. And a lot of people say, okay, wait a minute, you're talking nuclear weapons, you're talking people attacking us, isn't that strategic? It is, and there is a strategic warning elements, but that gets in more to the intel community, looking at what are the strategic indicators, what are those views where I think it's coming out. Integrated tactical warning means an event goes off somewhere on the planet, we observe it, you have to react to it. And that, in a nutshell, describes most of what the crews, the procedures, and the equipment that are in the mountain comprise. Within Cheyenne Mountain itself, it's a little city. This is a little model. There's actually a museum at Peterson Air Force Base. I would strongly encourage you to go there if you get a chance and you're a Cold War buff and you're interested in more on NORAD. It's a wonderful museum that's on there. A little bit smaller hours than most, but it's a great place. I had the good fortune of work taking me there in September. So that's why I actually took this picture there. But it shows you the buildings, the 15 buildings they mentioned, how they're organized. All of this in a giant cavern that's about 5/8 of the mountain, or 5/8 of a mile into the mountain, and under another about 2,000 feet of solid granite. So what's in that mountain? Well, I love that stencil on the side of when you go by some of the facilities there. Without power, it's just a cave. So there are 8 very large diesel generators that will run that. This is kind of the command center. Looking within the mountain, in addition to all those buildings, there's the infrastructure to run its power. Now, any given day, they're actually running off Colorado Springs power because it's cheaper, and it's you have a limited amount of fuel they keep within the mountain. But these are able to go on in an uninterrupted manner if there were need to button it up and sever all the external ties with the outside community. You got to be able to breathe, and you got to keep going. It's a cave. You know, I think I may have been genetically predisposed. My grandfather on my mother's side was a coal miner in West Virginia. So here I found myself in some parts of my life walking. I think I contemplate that sometimes when I missed the crew bus and had to walk in, or just felt like walking into the mountain, which you can do. But yeah, you got to get air in there, and you got to keep it warm because let me tell you, it's about 50-ish degree, and that's just that temperature. When it's fully operational during the day and all the staff is there, it's warmer in the mid shifts, etc. It could get chilly. There's a pond in there, which has both non-potable water, but they keep the water and the diesel in there because they will naturally separate. So that's both the diesel and also the water for toilets and cooling and etc. from the mountain. And you will see, I couldn't find a good picture, but they keep some duck decoys in there just because they got a sense of humor. So you'll see those floating around. Hey, you want to take a spin class? It's got a little gym. This view of it's kind of like looking at a hotel room gym, so it looks a lot bigger than it really is. But there's a gym, there's a dispensary, there's a place called the Granite Inn. It's a chow hall. I think everybody would usually sometime during their shift go by the chow hall there. It was famous, had a famous burger called the Barney Clark. It was a one-eyed double bacon cheeseburger. Anybody venture to guess why it was called the Barney Clark?
Heart disease.
What's that?
Heart disease.
He would, yeah, exactly. Well, he was the first recipient of the Jarvis artificial heart. So if you were getting a, one-eyed double bacon cheeseburger, you were doing that. But anyway, and you would see these conics when you're walking in different parts of the mountain. You see a lot of these just stuck up against the wall and piles of cots. And the words there, button up. What that had was the facilities. If they had to button it up, you had MREs, you had blankets, you had other things that you would need to continue operations there self-sufficiently. And if you're inside the mountain too, you want to have your own fire department because if something happens in there, you can't wait for local. Just driving up to the mountain will take you 20, 25 minutes, and you're getting inside. So they have a fire crew there. Well, hopefully now you've got a kind of a flavor for what it's like inside the mountain. I want to actually take you through, if I was driving up there to do a cruise shift, what it was like. So I lived up in, how many of you have been to Colorado Springs or familiar with that area? Yeah. How many, any Army people that have been at Fort Carson? Okay, yeah, so you looked up there at Cheyenne Mountain. We used to live at Fort Carson, so we had television, a central television monitor, had a lot of different screens. You could see display screens in different centers. And I always said Channel 23 is when you want to know what the weather was. Channel 23 was a camera outside the mountain that looked down on Fort Carson. So if it got like an hour before cruise shift and you want to know if you were going to have to sweep snow off your car or something, or if you just want to see if it was sunny outside or not, because when you're in the mountain, you kind of lose track of that. What time of day is it again? So we used to look out at that point. So I would drive down I-25 from up close to the academy down there, and then go this winding road up to Cheyenne Mountain. And here's a flat area there, which is a parking lot. It's the upper block. There's a lower one if you really are having a bad day. You got there and the upper lot was full. But see that little building that's right in there? That was a portal by which you would enter in, and you come across a very smiling person like that, ready to help you through that. This was one that was in the Airman magazine, but nothing is better than seeing something like a security police photo like that. In the upper left-hand corner is no photography. But anyway, they had permission to do that. And yes, there was that you had your badge and your stuff in there. And we say there's two types of people entering Cheyenne Mountain: those who forgot their badge and those who will forget their badge. And you only forget it once. I did that once, and you can get someone to vouch, but it's about a half-hour process. And when you're being late for crew, you end up either buying beer or donuts for the whole crew. So that's kind of the rules we gave it. So you would come through here, go through a turnstile, and you would board a bus. Actually, the big blue school buses they used to have, which ran about every 15 minutes. Or you could walk inside it. You would go in that exact looking portal, and this is what it looked like going down. Actually, someone there is walking on the sidewalks going back. So it's like I said, about 5/8 of the mile back, and it just is. So you look up, you will see there are bolts and there's nets in there. There was reinforcing bars that kept the structure in shape. There was like very heavy duty chicken wire that would keep little pieces of debris from hitting you. But this is how you walked in, and you would come to that first blast door. And if you look right here, there was another security police station there. and their primary duty, once you get in there, they don't need to check your ID again. They're there if they get the notice to be able to close the doors. So, you walk through the door. You can see the gentlemen here are in civilian clothes. We had many civilians, and it wasn't all military that were working there. Most of our, just like today, a lot of the information technology, the IT support was civilian. Some of the administrative staff. There were sections, not just the command centers. There were whole staff functions that were in there as well. Standardization, evaluation, the operations, and I'll talk more about what they might do. But it was fully functional, operating in normal business hours, maybe about 7 or so in the morning till about 4 or 5 at night, and then the crew was running, of course, 24/7. Walk in there, you walk around another corridor, and along these is where you might see some of those stacks of cots and stacks of supplies that are in there for the self-sufficiency. You do see some cars parked there as well. If you were a command director or if you were one of the directors of one of the staff organizations, so that means you were probably a colonel or a Navy captain, you might have a parking space there. But I was a major at the time, and no, I wasn't even close to getting a parking spot there. But they were allowed to actually come all the way through. You'll walk by those springs. I'll give you a scale of those springs in just a moment. But yeah, the buildings were built actually on the springs. The building were built by almost to like Navy ship designs. So I'll show you a corridor here in a minute. The Navy guys never had a problem finding, or Navy and Marine usually have a problem finding their way around the buildings. Air Force and Army, not so much. You had to come up with your own little landmarks and stuff about how you navigated. And you could always tell someone who was new to the mountain because they'd have that look kind of like in the Pentagon sometimes when they're looking around, or they've walked around one of the rings and they've come up and they're faced with a bulkhead and they don't know where to go. So yeah, your first couple days, everybody gets lost. This is a modern picture. You can see the patches that are on there. Has the Northern Command and U.S. Strategic Command. When I was in there, would have the Air Force Space Command. They actually own the facility, are responsible for its upkeep. NORAD's always been on there. And I got to say, all these pictures here, they've done a pretty good paint job in the last couple of years, because when I was there, it was a little more rustic, shall we say, a little less well kept. And that awning and everything, that nice one that says welcome, that wasn't there. It was just a set of steps that went up in there, very, very utilitarian. You walk in here, and this is what the corridors look like. Unremarkable, little, kind of like walking through the halls of the Pentagon. You have little numbers and items in there. You got to know, okay, I'm in this building, so I need to go up there. And there was a couple of flights of steps each way. So you learned shortcuts and different ways of getting around. And once you get in, you'll eventually get to a command center. All the command centers were SCIFs. They were secure facilities that you would, again, even if you got inside the mountain, you made it into the hallway, you either had an access code to get into your particular SCIF, or you had to have someone meet you there to let you in that worked within that. So in other words, I could get into the Space Control Center, but if I wanted to go to any of the other centers, I usually just call ahead and say I'm coming over with something, and they would buzz you in, and they also had cameras, etc. But even within that, it was compartmentalized going between the centers. Then when you finish the shift, you look outside, and it may be, the weather may have changed, the time may have changed. This is a very famous photo. We call it the moon over the mountain. This was a very popular going away gift. The ones that had nice wide borders and people would sign off on there. And actually, when they redesigned the crew patch, they modeled it after this kind of moon over the mountain. And so when anybody else that worked there knew it looked like the rest of this looked like there's a big black object there and a little white dot. How's that supposed to be NORAD? Anyway, so it was, they had its distractors. Now, I promised you I'd show you the scale of the springs. There you go. And that one is actually a little bit uncompressed, but I took that at that same museum at Peterson Air Force Base. They have opened up they're working on a Cheyenne Mountain exhibit, and they have some of the old displays. They have that model of the facility. So that's a work in progress. It's coming along rather well. Okay, what I want to talk about now is what crew life was like when I was in Cheyenne Mountain under CMOC, Cheyenne Mountain Operations Center. And this period in here was circa 1995, 1996. we are still operating, at least in the Space Center, most of our checklists dated back to 1985 when they've been established by U.S. Space Command or earlier. And when I went from working crew to shifting over to working staff and working stand-about, my boss said, well, the first thing you need to do is go around all the different, you need to go on a shift in each center and watch all their operations, because even though you've interfaced with them, you actually do a full 8-hour shift and see all the stuff they're pulling. And I said, well, there's a lot of work to be done in the Space Operations Center. So he goes, those checklists are like 10 years old. He goes, do a shift each and just come back and talk to me. So I did that. I came back, and after being in the Air Defense Operations Center for 8 hours, and I went through all their checklists and stuff, and I think the oldest one I found was 1953. I came back and said, okay, I got it, boss. There's higher priorities for updating some of the checklists. And some of them are still perfectly good, but yeah, you'll want to look at your checklists more than every 30 years. So it was good. It was job security. I'm going to show you another quick clip. It's about 2 minutes. This is one that's been unedited. It was actually some Associated Press footage in their kind of archives. It doesn't really tell a story per se, but the uniforms that they're wearing, the equipment that they're looking at was the era that I was in. You'll see somebody with that patch, and you'll see, look at the flight suits of this, of an Army 06 that's talking to you. You know it's an Army guy because he's got this Ranger tab on over here. He's got to have that. So, and he earned it. So that's.
My sensors are telling me there's 5 missiles being launched.
This is the command center within Cheyenne Mountain.
In fact, I can't verify to the president, so this is definitely coming down.
You can see here the patches of NORAD, U.S. Space Command, Air Force Space Command. So it's and there's the bus.
The Soviet Union had the greatest capability to strike the United States and Canada and to threaten our homelands that NORAD protects. Nowadays, there are more countries that have that capability, not only with nuclear weapons, but with the capability to have nuclear weapons to reach us.
Everybody loves the Springs. There goes the original Colorado Springs. Take a look at those phones. Each one of those buttons is a separate line.
We fully believe that negation of space, that is, preventing bad guys from using space against us, is fully authorized under international law for self-protection. And we do not believe that that's an issue of dispute.
And there are the checklists, the big checklist, big thick.
Anybody who has a capability to strike our homeland is a person or is a group of people that we have to watch very closely.
And that would be your end of shift coming back. Supposed to come back, turn around, you go back out the portal to your parking lot or to your car and head home. Okay. So in those days, the CMOX meant the Cheyenne Mountain Operations Center consisted of 5 centers that were all operating together. And they had the command center, which was what you saw mostly in there. There was an Intel Watch Center. Intel Watch Center is exactly what it was. They were looking at strategic indicators from all different methods. So it was kind of a fusion center in there. I loved it. It was one of the stops when I would come on for a crew because it was one of the closest centers there. But I'd come in there probably about half an hour before crew change, especially if it was crew Monday. I'll get to that a little bit more, but when you were doing your first part of your 5-day shift, and they had the big board. They had ceiling to floor, about 40 feet across, and it was about 10 feet high, map of the world. And they had the big icons of the Soviet deltas and the Yankees, and they had a little board that was like an old cafeteria might have with the letters you pull on and off, and you could look up there and say, here's some of the events. They may be launches, they may maybe missile tests, etc. Those were the ones you could look up there and see the menu of what might be coming up over the next 2 weeks, and say, okay, if one was coming up on might be your shift, you might say, hey, what can you tell me about this? And they say, yeah, we got some information from, and we think it might be doing at this, and so forth, at this place. And so you get a little bit of better feel with your situational awareness before coming in there. That was good to know. Air Defense Operations Center, that's kind of the bread and butter of NORAD. So you saw those F-16 fighters, that would be the fusion center, knowing command, if somebody, the CD, the command director, which was a colonel, that was the colonel you saw there was an Army colonel in that place. It could be any service. Did you notice what color his flight suit was? It was actually gray. It was actually gray. And how many times have you seen gray flight suits in the military? As far as I know, they only existed in Cheyenne Mountain. Now, I've worn flight suits of 3 different colors in my career. Blue, which is a standard space and missile one on it. They changed when they finally found out that the blue ones didn't last very long, were not fireproof. They were basically more expensive than the Nomex. They went to the green one, flight suits, and the pilots didn't like that. But anyway, but in between there, they wanted a joint-looking flight suit. So they couldn't make a purple suit. Joe said they made it gray. Only one service did not wear the gray flight suits. Can you guess what that was? Oh, the Navy wore it was the Marine Corps. And because the Commandant of the Marine Corps said, thou shalt not wear the gray flight suits. The Marines will always have a distinct duty uniform, so they wore their battle uniform. So you would see a mix depending a lot of times on the weather. When it got into January in Colorado Springs, you might want to wear your BDUs at that time instead of a flight suit. Even with long johns on, the wind can whip right through that, so sometimes you might wear your BDUs instead. So anyway, you saw the flight suit. The command director was that colonel. Within each of the centers, they were usually run by the commander was usually a lieutenant colonel, an 05, our commander in the Navy, and then the deputy crew commander would usually be a major, which is what I was. And that, again, could be any service. When I was going through my upgrade training in the mountain, my 2 primary instructors, one was an Army aviator, flew attack helicopters, and the other was an Army armor officer who taught me, Jim House, he taught me the immortal Army standard. And I was doing something in one of the exercises, and I wasn't sure about something, and I didn't shout out to one of the guys who did the job. And he goes, Jeff, what happened here? You were too quiet. You got to make sure they know what you're doing. And I go, Jim, I wasn't sure if I was right or not. And he goes, well, if you're going to be wrong loud. So that's the. So got it. And again, we were in Space Control. The 5 combat crews: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, and then there was also a staff crew, and each had a patch of different color that would have their crew designation on that. Ideally, if you came on a crew and it was Delta crews on, everybody would be Delta crew. But you may see probably 90% of them were. If you wanted to take leave though, and it came on one of your crew days, you may swap a shift with somebody. So you might see somebody with a Bravo patch or a Charlie, or you might see some of these gray patches that said staff on it. When you went to staff, you had to do at least 2 proficiency shifts every month in your center to remain your proficiency, and you had to be evaluated like everyone else as well. Okay, there's the command center. That's, if you notice the patch that's on the lieutenant colonel there, that is a Cheyenne Mountain Air Force Base patch that he would wear. He's got the gray flights or suit on. In that video, if you notice, there was a jacket hanging over it, and there was looks like almost like an RAF patch on it. It was actually Royal Canadian Air Force, there were Canadians on crew in each of the, we did not have Canadians on crew in Space Control Center, primarily because most of what we dealt with was not releasable to Canadians. You did have some things that were going on in the mountain that were not releasable to everyone within your element. In fact, when I was on crew in the Space Control Center, there were certain times we get within our operations that only the commander and one of our space control analysts, they would actually go within a vault, within a skiff, to look at some of the material. And I still, to this day, don't know what they're doing. I think I do, but I don't. I mean, I don't know for sure, and so I wouldn't guess. This is in the Missile Warning Center, and again, these type of displays, the 527Ms, were getting phased out. But you see, here's the Navy petty officer. He's on Bravo crew, and he's in his gray flight suit there, doing missile warning activities. Those multi-line phones, I told you to take a look at it at the command center. We had the red switch there, which operated the multi-line phones and the standard STU phones if you need to go to top secret. But on our phone, I have 40 different phone lines that came into the center in Space Control Center. Many of them were to other how you communicated between the centers. We had rows if it was a white button, it was unclassified. If it was a blue button, it was secret collateral. If it was red, it got to top secret collateral. If you didn't want to go top secret CSI, you got your STU. And then we had this other phone that just sat there and looked like a normal everyday phone. It didn't look like a bat phone or anything. It just a regular kind of beige color. I don't know. That was the op suite. And the op suite worked like this. Every station in the mountain had that phone at it. If you picked that up, just the function of picking it up, it rang at every station in there. And that's how you transmitted your operations command. So when you pick that up, you would give it about 2 seconds, and you would start off by saying space initiating, and then each of the centers would do a roll call real quick. So you'd hear air, intel, command, missile, and then everybody's on, and you say space initiating for rear world event. We have a new foreign launch indication. And you would be reading a script that's in those checklists to let every other center know what's going on. Some centers would have to give you a reply or give you information. Anyway, that's the way it worked. And at the end, you would say space terminating, and you'd do that same roll call, and then you'd hang it up. Well, that phone sometimes would get knocked off accidentally. And that was another beer buying or donut buying day on there. And of course, if you really wanted to, if you had some friends, you could pick it up, and if you knocked it off accidentally, you get on there real quick and say, Intel initiating, kind of blame it on somebody else. Like, remember I mentioned ITWAA, the primary focus that we're in there for. I worked a long time on that slide. We were, anybody know what that acronym stands for? It's the end of the world as we know it. We were still looking at that Cold War area. The Strategic Air Command was still in there. They still had the Single Integrated Operational Plan, the SIOP. I can't really go into too much detail in it, but there was, as with a SIOP, you have devolution of command. As higher headquarters are lost in nuclear war, the thing devolves. Eventually that would come back to Cheyenne Mountain in somewhere. So we did, during the time I was there, have global exercises that we would work with, and sometimes it would be, for exercise purposes, come down to us into this facility to think about doing nuclear war. Does that sound familiar? Like a movie you may have seen, like in the 80s? I don't know, maybe it would look something like that. War games. They used to do public tours in Cheyenne Mountain on the day shift, so they would have those in there. In fact, that little building where you would have a portal, you could go in there, have an auditorium, get a little video about it, and then actually be led through the areas there. The makers of that movie, I understand, took that tour 9 times when they were trying to design the ambiance of being inside Cheyenne Mountain. It is Hollywood. You can tell it's a lot better technology than we had at the time. but they weren't as far off as they thought. And I was really pleased. NORAD came out with the History Office just updated their history. Actually, it's back in December 2012. And there's two incidents that I used to not be able to talk about because they've now published them. So I'm going to show you verbatim what happens when war games for real happen. I'm going to break the PowerPoint protocol and actually read off this for the benefit of the recording device there. But on 9 November 1979, for about 3 minutes, a test scenario of a missile attack on North America was inadvertently transmitted to the operational side of the 427 Mike system in Cheyenne Mountain Complex Operations Center. 427 Mike, that was the automated system that was built that operated all of the command and control functions for NORAD. The test data was processed as real data displayed on missile warning consoles in the command post and transmitted to national command centers. About 8 minutes elapsed between the time the test data appeared and NORAD assessed confidence that no strategic attack was underway. That was 8 long minutes, let me tell you. This aroused widespread public and congressional interest. Corrective actions to prevent a reoccurrence continued into 1970. This incident was fictionalized and exaggerated in the 1983 movie War Games. Yeah, we didn't have a Whopper, the computer and stuff there, but there was a simulated site on there. And in fact, I learned later when you would be on a given shift, sometimes running simulations at the same time you're processing real world. And you knew it when you were in exercise. They did add on a lot of protocol to ensure you knew exactly when you were in a protocol or an exercise time versus a real world. There's also some happy accidents. Maybe you may have heard this. Now, this predates Cheyenne Mountain, but its heritage carried on there. On Christmas Eve, 1955, there was a person the colonel on duty, and he got a call from a kid saying, "I want to talk to Santa." So I really don't know what he said to the kid, thinking it was a prank phone call. Well, how did you get somebody hung up on it? Started getting these calls from kids wanting to talk to Santa. A local newspaper had set up a phone line to supposedly talk to Santa on there, and they misprinted the number. The misprint happened to hit, by coincidence, into the command center in NORAD. So what did they do? They're like, we're on crew duty on Christmas Eve. It's boring. Nothing is going on. Let's roll with it. So they pretended to be Santa. Well, it's grown into quite a following now. And if you get a chance, the site will be up again on 1 December. If you have kids or grandkids or something, it's actually now really highly sophisticated. They have all kinds of great computer graphics and stuff, and they'll show you where Santa is on there. But they decided to make lemonade out of lemons in that case. Remember they said that incidents would never happen again? How many of you seen the movie Failsafe or read the book? And actually it was on Turner Movie Classics a couple months ago, and I watched it again. At the very beginning, it has a disclaimer saying, the adventure about the United States Air Force assures us that the events that are depicted in this will never happen. One of the plot elements of that is a computer chip fails. Well, 3 and 6 June 1980, failure of a computer chip. Within a line multiplexer of the Nova 840 computer, for your purists out there, of the NORAD control system caused false missile warning data to be transmitted to Strategic Air Command, the National Command Center, and the National Alternate Command Center. Again, a number of technical and procedural changes were made. This incident built upon the public and commercial concern back, of course, in the previous one. So one of the things we did, if you remember the movie War Games, and they waited out, and remember the world starts blowing up, and they've got this little airman, Airman Snuffy on the phone. Are you still alive? Yes, sir, absolutely. Well, that was a little bit more realistic too, because one of the tenets they built in to make sure something like this did not happen again, they went to what's called dual phenomenology, which is saying is we will not make any strategic decisions or tactical decisions with strategic implications based on one source of data. It means you don't trust the computer by itself. So you have to have two different sets of data cooperating an event. And if it's a radar input from a site like, say you're out at Clear Air Force Base in Alaska, or you're at Cape Cod, the phased array there, they have what's called site reporting. So missile warning, sometimes when they would get in, they'd say, we have launch indications, blah, 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 blah. And then maybe 5-10 minutes later, they'd say, missile initiating, we have silent reporting from COD, from Neil, whatever like that. They would verify that this is no kidding an event we need to pay attention to. The other thing is when you were doing exercise, whenever you did the absolute, it was either space initiating for real world or exercise, exercise, exercise. And that was, and sometimes you would have initiating for real world, do that, terminating for real world, exercise that you would have multiple, because you would not normally stop an exercise just because a real world event went on. That was the command director's call as to when to say, okay, we're too busy today to continue with exercises. I want to spend just a little bit of time to close out the historical part and talk about what it was like in the Space Control Center where I spent my time. So I'll take you back to January 1995. And that kind of geeky looking guy with the glasses in the back in the dark here, that's me. So right there in the BDUs. And we are at Falcon Air Force Base, which is now Schriever Air Force Base, in the National Test Facility, which was built to be a simulation facility for Ronald Reagan's Star Wars program, the Strategic Defense Initiative. It's had many, I think now it actually houses some of the Army's 100th Missile Brigade and the Joint Force Component Commander of Integrated Missile Defense, which has the interceptors up in Fort Greely, Alaska. But that was my class. The distinguished looking gentleman with the grayish hair in what? Gray flight suit, right? Only one patch. That was before they went to we were consolidated but not combined. So he added that NORAD patch about a year later above it. Mark Willovision, who was he went on to command the group. If you look at the female there in the blue flight suit, she wore a blue flight suit because she was in an Air Force unit. She was our trainer. And that patch she had on was a training outfit, the training group out at Vandenberg Air Force Base. Colonel Willovision took over that, and I actually had one of the squadrons under him, so we got to know each other on crew, and kind of an interesting little tidbit. This is the only two photos I could find actually inside the Space Control Center. It was a skiff. There wasn't a lot of pictures taken for the right reason. And this is pretty representative. Someone's got the patches, a gray flight suit. That was Delta Crew, our patch that was in there. And a lot of computers with displays in there and a lot of checkers. I mean, a lot of the centers look like that. We did have, first about 6 months I was there, some of the old space tracking systems. These kind of like when you saw that Navy guy working. It was a big round CRT with the old electronic gun that you would actually touch on and change the information on there. They were phasing those out. We had a computer upgrade while we were there, and I used to jokingly say we're doing a mission from the 60s with equipment from the 70s in the 1990s. But it was so we got up to the mission equipment in the 80s maybe, but it was not the leading edge that some people would imagine. But just cover a couple of the mission areas. We had three primary ones. We were looking at space surveillance, looking at space threats, and looking at space protection. There's a lot of things up in space. And you want to be able to know what's up there, what gets up there that's new, that can look down and see us, can do other things that can affect operations on land. And you also want to know when they're coming in. It was actually, for the NORAD mission, it was more important to know when things were coming back in. Why do you think that is? If you have something that's re-entering from space, and especially one that generates an infrared signature and is coming into the United States, it looks a whole lot like the front end of an ICBM coming in. So we get some of these IR traces. We would be watching objects that we actively kept track of things we thought might re-enter the atmosphere when we were on a given shift, and to know where they were exactly, so that if an indication came in, we could correlate it and say this is the decay of this space object. So we don't need to consider it a threat. So keeping an active satellite catalog was very important. Uncorrelated targets, UCTs, also known, some people call them UFOs. That just means something we can't identify. when you first get something that's in the sky or in space, what is you call the UCT? And then you have to be able to detect, track, identify, and catalog it as quickly as you can. For space launches, we had two types on there, new foreign launches. These were launches that occurred somewhere in the world, and we may have been expecting them through intelligence means, but the country who was launching had not contacted us in advance. Countries that contacted us in advance, it was a cooperative launch, and they would usually provide the launch parameters and where the satellite they think it would be going and what the expected mission profile was. And in turn, we would help to say, okay, that's a good time to launch in space, you shouldn't hit anything, and be able to do some work with them there. We track the maneuvering of satellites. If a satellite maneuvered, especially if it was a foreign country, say photo reconnaissance satellite, that's information you want to know as soon as possible, because if it maneuvers, it's going to be having a different ground track, and you want tactical users to know that as soon as possible. And what else? And then, along with knowing what's going on in there for once something is launched, you catalog it in there. Sometimes space objects would break up, and that's a really bad day when objects break up, because then you have to count and individually catalog each one of those. Our standard for a new foreign launch in the Space Control Center to detect, track, identify, and catalog it was 90 minutes. Why 90 minutes? 90 minutes is the shortest period of an orbit that a satellite can have. If it goes any lower, it's not going to be in space anymore. So that was allowing it one orbit. And for certain threat missions, you might expect it to do some maneuvering right after that. Our sensors, we had three primary type sensors. Ones that were out in space, the Defense Support Program, looked at infrared traces, radars, different radar sites. That one is at Cape Cod. And then ones that were optical in different spots in Hawaii, New Mexico, Spain, and Diego Garcia. I'm going to close up a little bit quick. I'll do a couple of quick. I'll just get into the tech stuff. I want to point out that there was a lot of different orbits that are on there, and there's, when you look at all the objects that were in space, there's geosynchronous, way out there. Thinking of those are your communications and your sensing ones. MEO, medium Earth orbit, that's GPS satellites are there. Low Earth orbiting is some of the reconnaissance satellites, weather satellites, etc. And then you have these really weird looking ones, the Momayas and the Tundras, named after Russian applications, but these allowed you to get good looks at the northern hemisphere at a lower energy for the booster. And that's kind of what space looked like back in the mid-1990s. It's gotten a lot more crowded. We had somewhere around 10,000 objects, give or take, for a given item. This is not just active satellite payloads, it's different types of debris, rocket bodies. People say, what's the smallest thing you can see? And we used to have an actual bolt. We call it the space bolt. So this is not the space bolt, but that's about the size of an object. Cavalier Air Force Station can see, can distinguish objects about that large in space. You would get debris from that. Just like we're getting more greener in our ecology, the early days of space were very messy. They used explosive bolts and other things that would create debris. Satellite, space vehicle designs now try to keep it so there's as little debris when you do stage separations, etc. Because when you're in space, you're going 17,000 miles an hour. This is lethal for, you can take out a school bus. It's a kinetic weapon. These are the sensors that were, every one of them that is on the map here were in existence back when I was on crew, except for Globus 2, way up there in Norway. And it used to be out at Vandenberg Air Force Base, known as Half-Stare. It was a developmental radar. I don't really know when it was deployed operationally there, but all the other sites are pretty much as they remained, or as they were then. If you trace space, launches and orbits on laid out a Mercator plot of the Earth, that's what they would look like. And so we actually had a device there called a slip and slide. And we had a map of all the sensors like that, and we had this plexiglass piece that looked like this, and it had different shapes based on the the trajectory of the orbit that we initially get on there. And so when we get indication of the launch, we go over and slip and slide over the launch site and see what sensors would be able to see it. And I'll see if I can, I would love to get that in a museum, by the way, the slip and slide. When they went to an automated function, they were going to take it out of the Space Control Center, and we said, no, we love the slip and slide. And so it kind of slide like this, plexiglass, and we come over, and you say, okay, here's the liftoff point. It's coming out of Baikonur in Kazakhstan. And you can see, okay, you know based on its launch azimuth that you got from the DSP, what its orbit's going to look like. You say, hey, Altair, we would actually communicate and say, take a look at this. And then we come over and say, okay, Cana Point, it's coming your way. Ascension, look at it. And alert these radar sites where to slew their antennas and what to look for so they could help us do that detect, track, identify, and catalog as soon as possible. And this might be some information. If you look, it's kind of weird because you're saying, how does the satellite get from here to here? And that's because it's doing some nifty stuff in space. It's going out this geosynchronous and called hold and transfer orbit. But this is what, in a cooperative launch, that the country will provide us in advance. So we don't have to guess what's going on. We know where it is, know where to look, and we can help make space a safer place for everyone. Some of the key partners we had doing that. The 1st Command and Control Squadron was an Air Force squadron co-located in Cheyenne Mountain, and they always had at least two members on crew with us in the Space Control Center. They took care of all the routine satellite cataloging. We took care of the significant events. Once something was cataloged, initially when we handled the first tags, they would add it and maintain the items on there. They also helped set the maintenance schedules for radar sites. So before a radar site would go down for scheduled maintenance, they had to call back to one CAX and say, can we go down for maintenance? And that's when that stop I told you about over at the Intel Watch Center, and they look over and they'll say, hey, can Cana Point go down? And we say, no. They need, if it's not mandatory, delay till next shift because we're expecting something, and that's why it would be available. You ever been over to Dahlgren, Virginia? That's where Naval Space Command had an alternate command center. Wednesdays, if you were working crew and day shifts on Wednesdays, they took over the lead for space operations, and we would be in a hot shadow background. So that was our backup. All right, let me quickly cover what a typical shift would be like. You come in and have a crew change, okay? I would, like I said, stop on the way in, maybe at Intel Watch, get smart on that. You sit down with your component and you open up the checklist and say, here's what we're doing, here's what we had. And I love this. Sometimes acronyms just make so much sense. They would have already put together the NORAD U.S. Space Command Operational Information Summary Brief, or the NOIS. Love it. So you had the NOIS brief, and what that did is it told the incoming command center, it was a brief to the command director, and every now and then you might get someone coming down from Peterson Air Force Base also watching it, but said, here's the status of everything, here's the interceptors, here's the warning, here's the sensors, here's what we're expecting on the watch, and here's the exercises we're going to be running, and even if you had like some crew positional evaluations, here's what's going on. So everyone had the same situational awareness, and then you would go off and sometimes maybe do a mountain-wide exercise where all the centers were operating. Those would last anywhere from an hour to 3 hours. And you also might have some center-specific ones if you want to hone your skills. You might also run those if you had some new members that were coming in and getting their upgrade initial training for their benefit so they could actually practice in there. And then you also had to go through certain scenarios. Each position had to have an annual, or had to have the initial certification and then an annual recertification. And that was a lot of my job on Standard Hour, was coming in at all different shifts to go and do positional evaluations of the crew members. Once a year, we would have a mountain-wide exercise for the crews, and that was about a 5-hour scenario that each crew would go through to be certified as a combat crew. During the day shift, you might have you would always be working administrative tours, fitness reports, different type of historical reports. During the day shift, you might have tours. You might actually have to take a skiff down to unclassified and have tours come through. that was good and bad at times on there. The cost of running Cheyenne Mountain was very high, and a lot of the public was allowed in there to let the public know what it was, so they know where their tax dollars were being spent. But it could be a challenge if you're in a facility. And there would be times we would get that opposite would ring, and we just say, "You guys got to leave," and lock the door and get to business. We had 0600 started the day shift and changed over at 1400 for the mids, and then 2200 was the nights. If somebody was sick on the next shift, your position, you got a call on that. Guess what? You're going to do a 12-hour shift, and then the one that followed them was going to come in 4 hours early. So there's ways of covering it. But we did standard 5 days off, or 5 days on crew, 2 days off, and then on your third day after that, you came back and took the next shift. So you had 5 days of 6 o'clock start, and then 2 days, and on the third day you come back and do a 1400 hour, and so forth. Your body really got screwed up. We used to talk about crew Mondays versus real Mondays. So you might come in and it's crew Wednesday, and you treat it like that, and you literally sit there and say, "What day is it again?" "Oh, it's Friday out there." Okay. It was a bit confusing at times. Just a little bit of an artifact, and then I'll kind of wrap it up for Q&A. I love this thing. It was called the Terminator. And just like people love the springs, whenever they walked in to the Space Control Center, for whatever reason, they loved seeing, this is a clock. This is actually a clock that was up on the wall. And it's called a Terminator because it's a clock of where the Earth, sun, the shadow is, where you can actually see daylight. And so this moves as time goes by on there. Why do you think we need that in the Space Control Center? Well, remember those electro-optic, the optical sites that's all for looking in space. Right now, the one in Moran, Spain, all you're going to see is the sun if you try to look up into space on a telescope at that point. But one in Diego Garcia is almost in the shadow. The one that's at Maui definitely can see a space object if you needed to get data from it. So it allows you to say very quickly what optical sensors you have available. I'll maybe get this, and I'll just flash these last ones that I've gone a little bit over already. This is just a little bit about the tracking and impact prediction. Some objects do survive re-entry. I already mentioned we care, of course, where they hit on the Earth. The chances are they're going to hit in an ocean. What we really cared about is if it created a sensor, something that a sensor would read and may be accidentally considered a threat. Speaking of threats, we did have different ways of looking at detecting nuclear detonations in space. Foreign launches could be or were initially considered threats. The Russians still operated electronic warfare in space. Anti-satellite weapons, we had checklists for both looking at a direct ascent nuclear tipped ASATs they had around Moscow, as well as a coordinate one. That's a little picture you see in the old the DoD's defense or whatever Russian military publications put out by when Cap Weinberger was the Secretary of Defense. And we also had ground attack sabotage because we had scenarios where some of our site in Turkey or something, maybe it was being attacked by people there. We would have to take indications. Space protection. The space shuttle was still flying when we were there, and if it was up on orbit twice a shift, we would actually take its flight path, put a 1 kilometer box around it, and project it through the satellite catalog to make sure nothing was going to hit it. If anything came inside that box, we contacted NASA, and they made the decision whether to maneuver the satellite or the space shuttle or not. But again, that was on there. Solar weather. Space is a very hostile environment. Sunspots, coronal mass ejections, geomagnetic storms can really mess up communications and other sensors that we had, so we were watching that. Laser clearinghouse, there's government facilities and civilian research facilities that shoot lasers into space. They are supposed to, by law, coordinate with us and say, we want to fire a laser into space at this time from this location, and we could do a volume check and say, it's okay, you're not going to hit any satellite with sensitive electronics. And then the rest were the space protection, the cooperative launch, and again, looking for electromagnetic interference. And of course, as everyone knows, the Stargate is in Cheyenne Mountain, if you've watched that television show before. Actually, it's in my son and I are watching it a lot. We love the show. 2 chief of staffs of the United States Air Force made cameos on that show, it probably, it doesn't do a bad job of showing some of the inside of Cheyenne Mountain, and it's the best as far as giving the uniform and the ranks and the kind of ways that Air Force people operate. It's the closest it's come to television, but it's kind of a fun show. All right, I'll go through these last ones rather quickly. Cheyenne Mountain is still in operations today. Those are the patches you'll see out there, Northcom and U.S. Strategic Command, and of course NORAD is that 6-year constant. This is what, again, the primary command post now for air defense and continental United States is at United States Northern Command in Peterson. So they have flip-flopped. The alternate is in Cheyenne Mountain. That's kept on a warm standby. Those people come in every day, and there's other functions. That one where they were talking to the second lieutenant in that Fox clip, that's a communications squadron, and that is a communications fusion center. That works 24/7. And there are some other intel centers that have, in Homeland Security, that have offices that operate out of Cheyenne Mountain. The space object catalog has grown a lot. This is how about 10,000 objects were there in 1995. Due to a lot more space launches and due to a very poorly designed test of a Chinese anti-satellite weapon in 2007, it bumped it up. Now there's over 20,000 objects that are out there. In fact, if you look at that kind of dust cloud of space objects again, back in 2007 it looked like that, and by 2025 it's going to be even worse. It got to the point where they said, you know what, U.S. Strategic Command said we need to have this function become a Joint Force Component Commander for space, and they took the functions that were in Cheyenne Mountain and put them out at Vandenberg Air Force Base. And so they operate a much more sophisticated system than what we have, but a lot of the missions are the same, the equipment and training is better. We can get this later. This is that incident I was telling you about, the Chinese anti-satellite weapon that fundamentally changed low Earth orbit as far as the debris field. And in February 2008, the United States shot down one of its own satellites. And it was a one that had failed and had 1,000 pounds of hydrazine on it, and they wanted to bring it down. And under an operation called Operation Bert Frost, it was done successfully. And it was done very publicly because just like, you know, information counts, strategic communication counts, the Chinese did not even acknowledge this event took place for almost 2 weeks after it occurred. In fact, there's a lot of analysts that think it was not that the military did not coordinate with the civilian leadership in the test. On the other hand, if you went on the website, the DoD website, they went out of their way to show that this was authorized by the Secretary of Defense, a civilian authority, sitting there with General Cartwright at the time, who was the commander of U.S. Strategic Command, is Gordon England, who was a Deputy Secretary of Defense at the time. It was made very clear that when the U.S. shoots something into space, we do it not by the military acting on their own, but with the civilian authorities directing that. And another big change that's occurred in Cheyenne Mountain, some of the missions overall. Of course, now the 100th Missile Brigade, and it's stationed out in Colorado Springs, has the missile defense interceptors out of Fort Greely, Alaska, and some out of Vandenberg Air Force Base that can shoot down ballistic missiles. I think the field up in Fort Greely is up to 44 interceptors, but they use a lot of the same sensors that the missile warning, the air defense, and the space centers use in Cheyenne Mountain. I really don't know if they have any backup with the Cheyenne Mountain aspect of that, but most of your command and control is either Vandenberg, Fort Greely, or Colorado Springs. And again, NORAD is now 60 years old plus. This was a little slide of a celebration they had out in Peterson Air Force Base commemorating that. Again, even though a lot of things have happened in 60 years, Cheyenne Mountain's been there for over 50 years of it, and that integrated tactical warning and attack assessment kind of maintains the same focus. So at this point I call it index in shift. This is what it would look like if you were walking out of the mountain. It's a gray and gloomy in there, but hey, if you spend another 8 hours defending your country, it's a good day. So that's...
So Jeff is willing to take some questions. We are filming this, so we'd like to get them on the microphone. If possible, let me come out here and hand the mic around.
I forgot to ask a fundamental question now. Has anyone been in Cheyenne before? I forgot to say. I forgot to say we had a ringer. So, sorry, one ringer. Okay. So that's how you begin. That was in
Mid-80s.
what part?
Charlie Crew.
Charlie Crew on what center?
Space surveillance.
Oh, okay. So you were okay. So you know the evolution, whether it's space optic, space surveillance, and space control, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. With today's world with commercial satellites, what type of coordination process is required from the perspective, for instance, if SpaceX or Space or whoever it is launching, they send an email or they make a call with somebody and say, hey, we're launching tomorrow. Maybe that slips to the next day. How does NORAD have to coordinate that and keep in track of when that launch is going to occur? And then on top of that question is, what notification does NORAD provide to others so that the Chinese or somebody else doesn't get spooked by a commercial launch and didn't know that that was not something that was commercial? How does that coordination work internationally?
That's a really good question. And I'll tell you how it works ideally, and then I'll tell you what happens when it doesn't work properly. First of all the space launches right now are still done out of government facilities. So SpaceX would go out of either Vandenberg or Cape Canaveral. That would be the 30th Space Wing or the 45th Space Wing. When they go on and they use those government launch facilities, all of that is done as part of the procedure for them using those facilities. One of these, when we would send out, when we would do work there and send out messages, we actually had most of the information we had were pre-formatted messages, and we would kind of fill in the blanks, and we hit send. It would go to places like Omaha, Nebraska, to Strategic Air Command. Also go to National Military Command Center in DC, which would farm out a lot of the aspects on that. So if we were planning to launch, your question about how would they know, how other countries know, the NMCC would get that, and it usually passes it on to the State Department, which passes it on to the embassies we have there, and any country will have the country teams that are there. The ambassador is the president's representative, so they have it, and it's just procedure. There's two times, one when I was on crew when that did not work, when information was not passed back to us because the military liaison sat on it and it didn't turn out to be anything bad, but we had about an hour and a half of a big pucker factor, and and we had to wake up General Ashley, the 4-star, which he did not appreciate, because of course bad things happen at like 2 in the morning. I think it was actually 1:45. But anyway, the other was 1995. NASA did cooperative launches with Norway for studying the aurora, and they used these Orbital Sciences Corporation. They used black grants, which were sounding rockets. So they basically go up, took that in, and come back down. Somehow, the information that was normally sent to all the diplomatic channels did not make it to the right ones in Russia. Part of this was because Russia was this was after the coup attempts in there, and Boris Yeltsin was the president in Russia. The United States was still looking to see what the stability was going to be in there. It also, by a strange coincidence, the new rocket they were using, it was the first time use of an upgraded version, and we found out later that the Russian early warning system tagged it. When you see something you don't know exactly what it is, the computer will try to guess and give you the best guess at what it thinks it was, and it thought it was a Pershing II, which was an intermediate range nuclear weapon used by the Army, field deployable, and the generals in charge had convinced Boris Yeltsin that this was a preemptive attack by NATO to use EMP to take out the command and control, and then NATO was going to come in and finish the job of taking down Russia. So you may think Boris Yeltsin not the best leader in the world, but he was on that day. Because even though, again, history indicates he may have been a little bit tipsy, imagine that, on that day, he still had enough sense to talk to his general and say, this does not make strategic sense. This is not, because we're just going to have to ride this out and do it. And so one missed indication, it would have been published everywhere, even in the open press, but it did not make it to the decision makers. So that's a non-ideal case. But there are many different paths that goes on to. Also, it's a whole government thing, so SpaceX also has to file with Department of Commerce, Department of Transportation. There's a lot of licenses they have to do on it.
Another question?
I have three related questions on HR.
Okay.
How many people work there? How long is the training? Are they civilian and military? And is there a waiting list of people to work there, or are you always looking for people?
You're talking about in current day?
How many people, yes, how many people work there? How long is the training? And are they civilian and military? And you have more people, or you get them from the military to work there? The people.
Well, I can answer for certain one of those, which it is military and civilian. I don't know the exact current crew status on there. When we were working, and there's usually about 300 people in the mountain on a given day. And that was a mix of civilian and military in there. In a crew space control center, we would have usually about 11 people in there with the first CACs. Different centers, the Intel Watch, we only have a handful. I think Missile Warning had, was it 7 crew on that? And then the command center had between 9 and 11, because they had a lot of different people with different duties. I don't know what the current structure is, but probably in a ballpark of a couple hundred that would be working there on that. The waiting, the training again has changed over time. When I went through it, I had to go. I can speak to that. I had to first go through undergraduate space and missile training out of Vandenberg Air Force Base. I think that was 6 weeks out there, and that was just running, doing the fundamentals of space. Just what are orbits, what are space missile, what was the basic function. Then we went out to Schriever for about a little over 3-week course out there, and that was a lot more into, okay, now you've learned the basics of space, here's what you're going to be doing. You went through all the book knowledge of the threats, etc. Then you went to the mountain, and it took anywhere from a month to 6 weeks, depending on how many exercises before, of you coming in on shifts and shadowing someone and slowly getting more and more responsibility to the point where you think you're ready to be evaluated. So when you would be evaluated and become a crew member. Different services looked at that duty in different ways. So we would get an interesting mix of ones under fruit. So we, for whatever reason, got a lot of Navy. The Navy. We got a lot of Navy aviators and a lot more that were in the anti-submarine warfare. See, at least when I was there, a lot that were coming from the P3 school or the Viking. And every now and then, I had one Navy guy that helped some of the training I was doing, and he was actually an F-14 pilot, which is very, very odd, but his call sign was Splash because he's one of the few people that had survived an ejection of a F-14 before it crashed. So, yeah, the rest were, within that time there, I had bosses that were of all services, including Navy helicopter pilot, Army aviators and tank drivers. And one of my favorite bosses, a guy named Jim Naylor, who was died in World Marine Infantry. And if I could count 5 of the best leaders I would put on one hand I ever worked for, he would have one of them. Great guy. So, hope that answered as much as I can look up some of that and help you out though.
Yes, I can understand the monitoring that you're conducting at the facility. I'm not clear on the tactics. In the event that there was an attack against the United States, do you send out commands to different locations as far as the retaliatory response, or are there silos or operational facilities at your location?
No, that was not. We were more of a command, more of an information fusion center that would be informing. Like I said, we would give information to Strategic Air Command. We'd give it to the National Military Command Center, which would go back. Because again, if it came back to retaliatory at that point, it was going to be with nuclear weapons, which would have to get to the president, and they would send it down that way. Now, we did have some exercises looking at what happened if Washington D.C. was in the first attack, and there were graduated ways of looking at it. There still exists, the continuity of operations and command, and Cheyenne Mountain would take on slightly different missions for that, and there were certain, Delta Crew had a special responsibility. We were part of what they called the MCCC, which is a Mobile Command and Control Center. So we would actually pick up and deploy on certain exercises and do different types of war games, not infrequently, but that was a consideration. But as far as directing attacks from there, that was not the intended. That would be coming out of Strategic Air Command or out of the airborne centers, or and PDA through Washington.
To follow up on the human resources question that was asked earlier, I was wondering about the psychological screening that's performed on incoming servicemen and women, and what kind of monitoring is done during the course of their operations.
Right. For this duty in particular, the DoD program has a personal reliability program, the PRP, and that was still pretty much restricted to individuals that had direct access to nuclear weapons. So missile crew had to do that, bomber crews, maintenance officers and NCOs that were working with nuclear weapons doing their maintenance or the loading. All those had to have personal reliability program certification. For Cheyenne Mountain, we did not have to do that. It was pretty standard. I mean, you would just do observation, and there was no special program for that.
You mentioned it sounded like a 5-2-5-2.
Well, 2.5 kind of, because the third day you would get part of it, you would come back and shift over by another 8 hours. So, yeah.
After that period, did you get any time off, or
you would have to work? You would get a crew schedule for the next year, and to work your time off, you would have to trade. You would have to trade shifts with other individuals. So, I should mention, of course, for the screening, the psychological screening center, everyone that was in the center, at least in the Space Control Center, on the crew there, within the skiff there, had to go through the top secret screening. That was a clearance. So that does involve a lot of background information. So it did have that screening just for the classification, but yeah.
Hi, you had that one slide where it projected the number of satellites now and as to 2025.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think it was that one.
This one, or you do the graphic or the
that one right there, the one you just had.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, what issues do you see there in terms of either coordination or what's cliche space junk, or with the satellites that have aged, or any of those types of issues, obviously.
One of the biggest issues is gravity always wins. So these objects are being affected not just by the Earth's gravity, but everything else that's out in the solar system. So these orbits, people think of a satellite going around in orbit as it being this pristine, quiet vacuum, right? It's really like, not even good. I don't know, has Buckland Mill Road been paved yet? I don't know. But going in space is more like going down Buckland Mill Road. It's bumpy. There are electromagnetic. If you're a metal object going through there, there's stuff that will perturb you. There are solar winds that are coming across there. It's a hostile environment. So satellites have to maintain their operational orbit. They have to have different types of station keeping devices. And when satellites did it, it's like something adrift in the ocean, something that's going to go where it wants to go. And ones that are out here in this geosynchronous belt, they're very dangerous. I can't remember most of those now. Before they die, they have to do what they call supersync them, and they actually take them to an orbit outside of geosynchronous, so they are out of the way. But that wasn't considered in the earlier versions. Now, ones that are in low Earth orbit, it's the white kind of band there. Gravity wins. They're going to be pulled in just by gravitational effects eventually. and it's kind of self-cleansing. That kind of medium Earth orbit, the kind of cloud out here, that's where global positioning system satellites are. So when you're getting your direction from your car, all the GPS, it's a Walker constellation out there. Those satellites will not come in. It's hundreds of years before gravity wins on those. So part of it is you've got these positions in orbit, and there's a lot of, you say space is big, but the mission areas are very confined. Everybody wants to be in geosynchronous because you can see the Earth and stay there. So communications, if you're direct TV or something like that, you want a satellite out there because you can do you can get a lot of customer base if you're telecommunications, etc. So those are very solid. Those are dedicated, or those are allocated by through the UN, I think, called the ITU. They're highly sought after. And when you get a lot of dead stuff out, it becomes more and more dangerous. And the worst thing can happen if one satellite, how many of you saw the movie Gravity? Yeah, so, okay, it's Hollywood, but that's neat stuff. But you saw what happened when you have one collision, you got this debris field now, and it just becomes like, it's like shooting a shotgun, except that gravity doesn't win, and those pellets keep going around and around and around. And there's been a lot of simulations. One of the doomsday things for space is how much that would snowball. If you have one satellite hit another, it's sends some debris, and it's almost like a nuclear reaction potentially, and you can just trash the whole orbit. So that's one of the dangers. So some people said, well, why don't you come with a commercial company? It's like Space Trash Men. And you just send a satellite out there, and you grab it, and you bring it back, and you clean it up. And the problem with that is, how do you know? We have to be a little bit suspicious. So if it's a company run by Russia, it's going to be a Space Trash Man. It's got the technology that can go up to a satellite, grab it, and bring it back down to Earth. If it can do that for a piece of junk, it can do that for an active satellite as well. So it's a wicked problem that hasn't been solved yet. So.
Anybody else?
So geosynchronous basically is a parking lot. You need a parking slot.
Yes.
So does China also cooperate with the international community on getting their parking spots out there?
Do they
cooperate?
That's been a part that's pretty well normalized for that. There's only been one incident, and that was, I'd have to look it up again, but it was a small country had reserved a spot, and someone else went up close to the area. And that's been in, there actually is space law. There are courts that would take that up and do a lot of property. If you saw The Martian, with the movie The Martian, and he was talking about some of the, I want to be a space pirate, but some of the space law stuff does come into play. Because that comes into commerce, etc. That's an area where they will fall in line with normalized practices. And I think if any company tried to do something out there, that's pretty universal among the industrialized nations would be against that in there. But it is a very valuable spot with there, how to keep that available. There's some spots that have multiple satellites in there, have been a little bit synchronized. When you get out there, again, it's getting a little bit technical. The terms, there's geosynchronous and there's geostationary, and they're not the same. Geosynchronous means you're just orbiting at the same rotation way out there as the Earth, so you keep the same apparent. Geostationary means that orbit is inclined 37 degrees like the Earth, so you're actually over the exact same spot on Earth. Otherwise, you draw this kind of figure eight pattern in there. And so you can stack multiple satellites out at geosync and have them doing different.
And who manages all that?
Well, the UN has the registry on that. It's the IT.
Somebody has to have the data and the map of all the satellites.
Right. And the ITU is, and that's I think within the United Nations, and it's the international. What's it? Is it telecommunications?
International Telecommunications Union.
There you go. It assigns the slots for that, and they're kind of the police.
The monitors. Okay.
Now for near Earth and NEO and others like that, there's not a similar body that I know of, but usually, I mean, you don't keep a lot of the space industry is small enough, and the individuals that have the countries that have the capability to do that usually have a pretty good idea on on what's going on.
Thank you.
Kind of a follow-up question to that and my earlier question about launch. As far as the data, there's another organization or group, Coder, and there's NORAD. With all this space junk continuing to grow until we clean it up, what is the scenario? Someone says, all right, let's go back to SpaceX. I want to launch tomorrow. Okay, you look clear between 9:30 in the morning and 1 p.m., but if you launch at 1:15, there's a stick that will be flying by. Like, how, to that perspective, is information shared that you have a clear path for wherever you're potentially launching, whether it's GEO or people or NASA as well, that all these millions of things that are being tracked potentially are not in question to potentially impact your flight path whenever you potentially launch.
Right. A couple things. That's that cooperative launch. When you do the cooperative launch, you work with the government and you provide we actually had it back then, we called the launch folder, and there were standardized sections you could fold to, and it would give you technical aspects of the launch vehicle, the launch site, the anticipated time it would be, like in your doing its launch and early orbit determination, if it's going to go out to geosynchronous, when it would do its maneuvers to do a Holman transfer, and also when you go from a low Earth orbit to a higher Earth orbit, you have usually an upper stage, and where that upper stage is now going to circle until gravity wins, because it's boosting out there. That's the ideal case. Of course, you're monitoring that because upper stages misfire, satellites don't always achieve their ideal orbit. So that's usually tracked between the launch agency and not only NORAD, but also, like say, 30th Space Wing and their range control, because 30th Space Wing and 45th Space Wing, they're very interested that if out in Vandenberg you want a launch vehicle to go up, and then you want it to point west and not east. If it points east, that's a bad thing, and then you use a new flight termination, and the opposite on the western range. So a lot of that is shared well in advance with the people with range control primarily, and then for one of the things they would do for we used to do for cooperative launches, if you had the time and the azimuth and a window called a conical check, you would actually project a virtual cone, upwards like a big ice cream cone up into space, and look to see what would be coming through there for a projection of what could be. I will show you, I had a backup slide I can mention this, because right now, and this may have changed, because a lot of people ask, what happens if two satellites do collide? Who's responsible? Don't know. This is only the second, and again, there may have been others, the second verified actual collision between space objects. This is in February 2009. I know more about this, the Brent Cirrus one here in 1996, because I was actually the executive officer to the J3 in U.S. Space Command headquarters. That's where I went after Cheyenne Mountain. And that was where we first said, hey, looks like two space objects collided. So this is just some of the details of what had occurred on that. But this was a dead Russian communication satellite that took out an Iridium satellite, which of course is a mobile phone powered one. Iridium's 77, right? In an ideal constellation, just like an Iridium atom. But that was, to my knowledge, that's the only two that I'm aware of actual verified incidents of collision.
Do you know if this was something like in gravity, in 2 minutes, something is about to happen, somebody could have verified that through NORAD, or?
No, I don't think, there's any kind of warning on that. One thing also, the satellite catalog is published. There's a couple of websites you can go onto now where they've actually animated some, so you can go on if you want to know when you can see the International Space Station traversing the sky. If you ever gone and done that, there's several websites that will give you the tracking on that. Satellite catalog, you can request that. It's open. You can request that from the UN. You can request that from the Air Force or from the JFCC Space now in Stratcom and get a copy of that. And even a version of the ephemeris data, which is the 6 characteristics that define orbits. So you could create your own simulation as well.
There's still air traffic control for space.
Not that I'm aware. I mean, that's what the JSPOC is supposed to do on there, but not to the fidelity where you can watch every object all the time on there. Usually it will be for special, like there is like just the protection we did on the shuttle, they're still doing that for the International Space Station, just to monitor to make sure that if there's a conjuncture, and if there is, they've had times where I understand that the International Space Station had a conjunction, which means it came in within this box, and they deployed to just like they have, I think, with fire drills or fires they've had on board, they'll deploy to their crew capsule, their escape capsule, until the conjunction is passed.
Anybody else? All right, well, let's thank Jeff for a great presentation.
And I did promise Jason, when I finish cleaning, I still have, 30 years of retired stuff that I'm working through in my basement. I do have a Cheyenne Mountain crew. I'm going to donate one of my old crew outfits to the museum. Again, not exactly the period, but that'll be in there. So I'll have a Delta crew one with the gray flight suit. So.